Welcome to this Bible study on worship, and this is a series of studies that's been put together. The goal of this is not for us to improve our singing, it's not to improve our performance, our skills. The goal of this is to make us better worshipers in God's sight. The goal of this study is so that when you and I come before God, He is pleased with us and with who we are and with what we do. So we want to be able to present an offering to Him that is acceptable to Him. That's the goal of the study. When Jesus was here on earth, He only talked specifically about worship, that is, using the word worship. He only did that twice that we have recorded in the entire Gospels. Now, if you look at His parables and a lot of the other things that He said, a huge amount of the things that He said was worship. But He only talked about the topic of worship twice. And this is one of those times. And this is a negative statement. In Matthew 15:9, He's talking about the Pharisees and the kind of worship that they gave God, His own Father. He says, "But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." When He says, "but in vain," it means there was nothing at all to their worship. It doesn't mean they didn't fast. It doesn't mean that they didn't pray. It doesn't mean they didn't lift up their hands or they didn't sing. It doesn't mean they didn't give. They did all of those things. But all of it, the whole amount of their worship taken together, was completely vain in Christ's sight. And He said the reason was they were teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Their worship had zero value. We don't want our worship to have zero value. We want our worship to be something that's valuable to God. We want our worship to be something that is incredibly acceptable to Him, that He looks forward to. The second time Jesus talks about worship, and I don't know which happened earlier than the other one, but the second time I'm talking about as far as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is in John 4:23. This is when Jesus is with the woman at the well. Okay? Jesus, the woman, and no one else around that we know of. And apparently He'd sent away all His disciples. And here's what He says to her. He says, "But an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people the Father seeks to be His worshipers." What He says here is really key to understanding worship. And that is, He says, first, the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Okay, her question was, where should we worship? Do we worship in our mountain, because she was a Samaritan? Do we worship in our mountain? Or do we have to be like the Jews and worship in Jerusalem? Which one is correct? And Jesus totally changes the question. He doesn't give her the response she expects. He said, true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Okay, that's crucial. Our worship to God has to be in spirit and truth. That's an excellent statement. But then He throws in something else that had to be amazing if this woman really understood it. Then He says, for such people the Father seeks to be His worshipers. God the Father is looking for worshipers. He's seeking that. If you think back through the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, you do not find many statements that God is looking for any specific type of people. We don't find where He's looking for warriors. We don't find where He's looking for people who will give a lot of money. We don't find He's looking for people who are excellent at singing, playing an instrument, athletics, anything like that. But He says the Father seeks to be worshipers. And you think about the word seeks, that's something where you're intensely trying to find something. That's what the Father's looking for. But then I want you to think about who He's talking to. He's talking to a Samaritan woman. A lot of people look at the fact, okay, she was a Samaritan, so she was kind of an outcast to the Jews. She was a woman. Most Jewish men wouldn't easily talk to a woman. Jesus, of course, has even more knowledge than that. She knows she's been married 6 times. And she knows now she's living with someone who's not her husband. We don't know what her past was. We don't know why she's no longer married to those 6 men. Maybe she couldn't have children, and so her husbands, each one dismissed her, divorced her. It may have been something else, but for whatever reason, 6 times she's been divorced, and now she's living with someone. She has some background of who God is. She understands something about God. And she has some spiritual questions, and she comes to this man who seems to know so much about God. She has no clue, at least initially, that this is the Messiah. This is the one they've been looking for. And Jesus talks to her as though she is incredibly important. And I think the reason why is in the last part of that sentence. You see, Jesus and his Father had the same goal. Jesus was also looking for worshipers. He was seeking worshipers. I think there's a reason he sent his disciples away. They would have just been a distraction. He wanted to be there talking to this woman alone. No one else asking questions, no one else making comments, no one else even giving odd looks. Jesus was looking for a worshiper. And when he found this woman, he found one. So to me, this is an exciting verse for the woman. It's also an exciting verse for me and for you, I think. Because when God looks at us, he's still looking for worshipers. Jesus didn't say this in the past tense. For such people, the Father used to seek for worshipers. He said, for such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. And to me, that's you and me, the people who are before us and the people who will follow us. God is constantly looking for worshipers. So that's the goal of our study. Not to learn a lot of facts about worship, but to become worshipers. Now, as we do that, I recognize that worship runs through the Bible from Genesis through Revelation. You know, you see things in Genesis and you see the sacrifices and some of the prayers, and you see there's worship there. And you go to Revelation, and again, you find some prayers and people singing to God and falling before God and angels also worshiping, and all these actions of worship. They're in all these different books. But also, I think all the books, you're going to find things that they aren't worship, but you can worship God because of the things that are in them. Okay, so if we decide we're going to look at every place in the Bible that talks about worship, or every place in the Bible that we can worship, we're in trouble. Not because it's bad, but because it is an incredibly huge area. There's so much there. And you can certainly do that. I can't do that in a study like this. I began a study in worship quite a few years ago, and after spending a lot of time, I realized it was too big for me. So I focused this study primarily on the book of Psalms, because that's the book that God gave to the Jews as their kind of songbook, the things that learn these songs, that sing these songs, and it'd be going through their minds. Even during the week, they're out in the field, or they're working at a carpenter's bench maybe. They're making a tent. They're doing whatever their regular job is. Maybe they're just getting up in the morning. Maybe they're going to bed at night. But some of these songs would be going through their mind. And it was God's way of working worship into their lives. So I'm going to focus primarily on Psalms. And that'll be kind of our textbook in a sense. And then we'll use other parts like things from the New Testament, especially the Gospels, to bring out other highlights of worship. So if you're interested in joining me in studying what the Bible has to say about worship, if you're interested in trying to figure out how we can please God better through how we worship, I hope you join me in this series of studies. Thank you very much.